volví a encontrar. Soy así, ya es muy tarde para cambiar. Yo no espero nada, vivo sin rumbo. Solo quiero amar cada segundo. Soy aquel.
Welcome back, everybody, to the A Little Less Fear podcast. Today, I am so excited to welcome back, and I believe this is either her sixth or seventh time. I know I lost count. I should have gone back to count it, but this is her sixth or seventh time here on A Little Less Fear podcast. Tina Erwin is the author of 9 books on metaphysics. Her writing comes from an intense desire to know and understand the hard science behind the unseen world of action and reaction, combined with a sincere desire to share this understanding with other knowledge seekers. Her lifelong studies into the deeper meaning of events and actions were further enhanced by the experiences of a dynamic 20-year career in the Navy, working for the U.S. Submarine Force and retiring at the commander level. Commander Erwin found the Navy to be a tremendous schoolhouse in which to study all the facets of behavior and karma, from the worst to the finest levels of humanity. Welcome back, Tina.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. I think we're a great team.
I love our connection. We're definitely a great team, and I'm sure this spans past lives, because this connection of us never meeting in person. But I mean, you're across the United States. You're in Pennsylvania, if I remember correct.
No, I'm in Washington State.
You're in Washington State.
We're the last exit before Canada in the Pacific Northwest.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm in California, in Pasadena, California. It's like we're just thousands of miles away, but very close in proximity through our energy, which is really beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah, we are.
Tina Erwin, my goodness, you've written The Lightworker's Guide to Healing, Soul Evolution, Past Lives and Karmic Ties. You've got the Crossing Over Prayer book, Ghost Stories from the Ghost Point of View, volumes 1 and 2, Karma and Frequency, The Lightworker's Guide to Everyday Karma, and now your new book, Psychic Children, Psychic People, The Key to Protecting and Understanding Intuitions. What motivated you to write this book, this new book?
There's a lot of misconceptions about psychic ability, especially when it starts to manifest in children. And I wrote this book because suppose you're not a child, but you started recognizing your psychic ability when you were a child. You're going to be able to relate to the over 70 case studies that are in this book, because it's one thing for me to talk about it, but I can give you an example of something that's happened to someone. You're going to go, oh, now I get it, or this happened to me, or I see it. And I wanted people to stop being afraid of psychic ability, stop doing things that they think are helpful but aren't, and to understand that if you have psychic ability, it's not a gift. You didn't open it on Christmas morning, or you didn't get it for your birthday. It's an ability you earned life after life. If you can understand that, then you have it for a reason. And sort of taking apart the tangle in your head of, why do I have this? Why do I see these things? Why do I sense this? Might bring peace to readers, might help parents understand what they can and can't do. And above all, help people to understand the supreme importance of connecting to God, not source, not spirit, but to God, so that you can have a much more dynamic inner strength, because you're actually saying the word and building the connection will change your life. So that's why I wrote this book.
Thank you for that explanation. Right now, you just said source, not God. What do you mean by source, not God? I'm sorry, God, not source.
Well, people use spirit and source. And when you're dealing with something as esoteric as psychic ability, and you're operating in the ether, in the third dimension, the physicality is the third dimension, but the fourth dimension is the ether, where ghosts reside, where string theory operates, where quantum entanglement operates. That's the ether. You need to be specific, because There are a lot of beings that can masquerade and make you think you're connecting to source or to spirit. But when you are talking directly to God, and a lot of people have been abused by religion. So I had a client yesterday said the same thing. Well, I can't use the word. It's just, I just had bad experiences growing up.
Yeah.
But that's okay. But that's not God's fault. This is an experience you had, but someone separated you from the divine, from God. When you reestablish that connection, then the world starts to open up for you on a whole new level. That's why I want people to be specific, because they will interchange source and spirit. Spirit can be a black magician, spirit can be something quite demonic,
Mhm.
spirit can be alcohol. So when you are specific, basically you're telling the universe, I know who I am, I know who I'm speaking to. It's not vague, it's not some diaphanous being. It is the power of God and the divine. A lot of people are more comfortable talking to Christ. That's awesome. Be specific.
As long as you're specific. So being specific, because spirit can come in different forms of spirit.
Exactly. I've seen people who said that they were channeling spirit and they genuinely were trying to be conscientious, but they really didn't understand who they were talking to. They didn't know how to perform due diligence. How do you perform due diligence in another dimension? How do
Right.
you how do you make sure you know who you're talking to and you're really clear? That's the issue for me because the point of this book is learning how to set up safe parameters for working with disability. I mean, there's some scary things out there, but they don't have to be. If you start setting up a structure and a spiritual framework for moving forward with the ability that you have with confidence.
And so when you say setting up a spiritual framework, is it does it make sense? For me, what makes sense to this is to have some type of a prayer or a mantra to speak and paraphrase before you go into that meditative state to connect with um, quote unquote the spirit that you are being specific to calling.
Well, I had a wonderful teacher many years ago, and he said that if you had built the connection to the divine strongly enough, and you were pretty intuitive, and there are a lot of really intuitive people out there, you basically were in a constant meditation. You kind of don't leave it. You're always listening, you're always being sensitive. This new ability starts to live within you, and you start to use it on a daily, subtle level. That's why this book also discusses karma, the karma of the ability, the karma of who you're working with, the karma of your actions. When you have this ability, building this framework of understanding action and reaction, which is just a law of physics, it puts you in a position to use whatever psychic abilities that you have and can grow with in a responsible place. I don't even know if I answered the question. Um, when you have psychic abilities, sometimes you don't even know who you are. Now there's a slight difference between being empathic and having psychic ability. I'm not an empath. I have psychic ability that has just it continues to evolve. I'll just say that.
Mm-hmm.
The more I use it correctly, following, walking the straight and narrow of a spiritual path, the more different and subtle abilities seem to manifest. I am very careful what I connect to. I don't connect to everyone. And when someone tells me they are an empath, I kind of back them up a little bit because these individuals are loving and conscientious and they want to embrace and help everyone. And they want everyone to be better and to be happy. But part of this book is understanding that you can't want something for someone that they don't want for themselves.
That is true.
And you can't want something from someone that they do not have the capacity to give you. You end up constantly hurting yourself.
What do you
And
mean
then
by that? Somebody that doesn't have the capacity to give you something. What do you mean by that?
let's say that you have a parent. Sorry, I get very passionate about my conversations. Let's say that you have a parent who is distant and cold, and you maybe have been either on some level spiritually, emotionally abused by this person over time, and you want them to love you, and so you do everything in your power. You go out of your way. You keep giving and giving and giving, and they just keep sipping that energy and taking it and taking it. So you want something from that parent. That parent doesn't have the capacity or the inclination to give you.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you allow that parent to hurt you, you're creating a, a detrimental karmic situation. You're allowing that person to hurt you, that parent or friend or sibling to hurt you, and you're accepting the abuse. When you stop accepting the abuse and you take ownership of your own life, I don't care what label you put on the person. If
Mm-hmm.
someone is doing something detrimental to you, you need to stand up for yourself and say
Sure.
no.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to give it to you. How much are you going to give before you learn the lesson of standing up for yourself? And that's a huge lesson. And at some point, all mortal people have to learn that.
That absolutely makes sense. Because if you keep going trying to get something that you're never gonna get, you're also creating that karma, correct?
That's exactly right. You're creating this downward spiral. This person is constantly disappointing you. All those disappointments lower your frequency. All those disappointments with a lowered frequency create a physical health vulnerability. And so you're always feeling like a victim or you're a survivor of an abusive parent. And I encourage people to take the word survivor,
Mm-hmm.
put it away, and make a new decision to be a thriving personality. Because when I think of a survivor, I think of a person with their fingers on the ledge saying, I'm surviving, I'm surviving.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're telling
Barely
you,
holding on. Yeah.
just barely holding on. It's like, can I offer you a hand here and I'd like you to really live.
Yeah.
Be happy, feel joy, love with all your heart, and not survive, but thrive. It's a
Yes.
very different, much happier concept.
Absolutely. What about forgiveness?
When someone has harmed you,
Mm-hmm.
there is karma doesn't have, excuse me, you don't experience something without there being a karmic opportunity to learn a lesson. And when you have been hideously hurt, and there's so many variations of hurt that people receive for which they need to forgive.
Mm-hmm.
Someone says, just forgive them, you'll feel so much better.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you that that is not true.
Right.
You can't just step your fingers and you forgave this person who sexually abused you for 10 years.
Right. Right.
I'm sorry. Just doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to give everyone who's had a severe situation happen to them permission to take your time in the forgiveness process. Look at what you learned. And I frequently have done this with clients. You take an event, then you analyze the emotion that goes with that event, and then you look at what the lesson learned is. And if you have had an abusive parent, I have many clients with abusive parents, they don't they say, I don't know how to forgive them.
Mhm.
Well, let's look at all of the emotions that went with all of those abusive experiences. Let's look at, was it betrayal? Was it just abject cruelty? Was it unfairness? Was it abandonment? Was it whatever the emotion was, what did you learn? And how are you going to be different? When that lesson that person forced upon you is recognized, you start to take your power back from the person or the trauma of the incident. And that takes time. It's a process. Let's say that the person who did these terrible things to you has died. People go, well, I can't forgive them now because they're dead.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that
Oh,
before.
that's irrelevant. Doesn't matter whether they're dead or not. It's not about that person. It's about what you're doing for yourself. They may have been dead 100 years and it was a past life thing. I've had that happen too.
Right.
Someone murdered you in a past life and you had an experience in this life they didn't kill you this time, but it wasn't fun. What you're learning is that you want to take your power back from that person. And I use the word power, not from some delusions of grandeur, but
Sure.
power of life, the power to be happy and joyful, and the power to
Yeah.
love.
Oh, I love this.
You begin to understand the dynamics that go with these concepts, the experience, the emotion, the lesson. And if you do this with every single experience, all of a sudden you see the pattern of what you're here to learn. Now you see the world differently. And maybe you would be in a position to forgive the person. Maybe you would be in a position to say, this person taught me all of these things. And I'm free now. I understand what the lessons were. I'm not like this person. I am different. I forgive them for what they did. Doesn't mean I'm forgetting it. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean forgiveness doesn't mean that what they did to you was okay. It wasn't. It just means that you have a greater understanding of it. I had a I had a client whose father was so brutal, just beat her every day, beat her sister into mental retardation.
Oh my goodness.
It was horrific. And it took us some months to gently, it's like this matted ball of knot in your hair, and you have to gently separate it out because these are the very elements of the soul. When you're dealing with the soul of a person, you need to be gentle and kind and caring. You also need to help them to see that there's a path out of this if they choose. Not everyone can do that this lifetime.
Right.
If it takes a lot of courage to stand up to this, but if you can, and you finally get to the day where you can say, I forgive you, I cannot believe how much I have learned. In her case, I took her back so she could understand her father's life. And what she realized was, and we used old family photographs. It was a very interesting form of working together. She brought me all these photographs of her father as a child, and I said, and look how his attitude in the photographs goes from happy child, sad child, grieving child, angry child, vicious child. And she said he was beaten day after day after day after day after day by his family. is all he knew. And he
Mm-hmm.
projected that rage on
Right
his
onto her, on her daughter.
onto
Yeah.
her and her
Yeah.
children. And when she realized those things, she saw it differently. She was able to forgive him. But it was in her time, not my time, not an
Right.
artificial time.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting when you finally see it's almost it took compassion.
She developed compassion for her father.
Mm-hmm.
And when she developed that compassion,
Yeah.
it changed everything. I had a client whose husband had 400 affairs,
Wow. Holy moly.
and she didn't know it. And so she was pretty enraged when she found out. And when you have this level of betrayal, it physically affects you. It causes your body to be not at ease anymore. When you're not at ease, you're in dis-ease.
Yeah, actually when you said that, the one of the first thoughts I thought is I if I found out something like that, I would feel nauseous. That was the first feeling I felt, like sick to my
Yeah, well,
stomach.
when she ended up at my front door, she was vomiting. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it was pretty bad. At the same time, she took her power back. She did the work. I give her, I have a great admiration for her because she did the work. And she had to come to terms with her own rage, which meant she had to talk it out. But here's the irony in this. At the end of the day, she was and will always be the love of his life. When she began to see what his childhood was like, she could see that it wouldn't matter how much she loved him. He was like remember in the movie Ghostbusters, there's that
Hmm.
green monster in the
Yeah,
ground
Slimer.
eating and eating. This is a person who has been denied love. And they're constantly searching, give me love, give me love. And no
Yes.
mortal person can fill them up because what they didn't receive as a child
Hmm.
was so damaging. No person on earth can fill it.
Hmm.
They eventually have to die and come back because they can't fix themselves. Your subconscious is frozen at the age of your earliest trauma. Let me repeat that. Your subconscious is frozen
Hmm.
at the age of your earliest trauma. When that happens, if his if this lack of ever receiving love began to manifest not long after he was born, no
Right.
one's ever going to be able to mother him or love him enough. When she saw that, her compassion for him became enormous. She didn't condone his actions. She gained insight into them.
Hmm.
It enabled her to feel set free. And only then could she forgive him. Forgiveness is an incredible process.
It is an incredible process. And in the face of forgiveness, through developing this compassion, I can feel and imagine that it still wouldn't be healthy for her to stay in that relationship. I don't know what the results were, but given what could happen karmically if you still keep allowing yourself to be in a cycle like that, even though you have compassion and understanding.
The divorce went through. She has a civil, relationship with him because of after, they have children together. And that enabled her to feel that she was whole and that she hadn't harmed him or hurt him, but she couldn't stay married to someone who was exhibiting that.
Sure.
Because his trauma started at such an infant level age, the ability for him to do spiritual work to heal it wasn't ever going to happen. And when she began to understand that, she just wanted him to work on himself and get better. When you understand that this trauma is so massive, then maybe the person doesn't have what it is they need to even develop the insight to begin this healing process.
That makes sense.
It helped her to recognize that he still loved her, but he could never be for her what she needed. I think this is true in a lot of relationships. And when you can begin to develop that level of compassion for the other person, keeping that boundary, that's a really important thing. You're maintaining the boundary. I can have compassion for you, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to condone the behavior. I need to move forward with my life. It's
Sure.
okay for you to move forward with yours in a peaceful way.
Hmm.
And that means that you're now at ease with yourself.
That makes sense, and I love the way you put that. Thank you. I'm curious, Tina. I mean, it's possible for someone to have trauma in their childhood in just one life to create so much, I mean, this unhealthy cycle and pattern for the rest of your life, or is that a combination, a culmination of multiple past lives that have developed and created this cycle that's just has so much momentum that it's hard to stop? Because sometimes I feel like, are you serious? Just this one life created that much trauma, or is it a culmination?
That's very difficult for me to answer.
Okay.
If I gave you a snap answer, you should challenge me on it.
Okay.
He suffered so much trauma as a child in this life that it affected him for the rest of his life. But my feeling is he had been probably a pretty good person in previous lives because his coworkers adored him. He was a kind man. He was generous on many levels. He was conscientious of what he did. He was successful in his field. And so, were there elements of previous lives? Yes, we are. We are all products of the reincarnation cycle. But there are some lives that are so traumatic that they will influence far more heavily the current life you're in.
Hmm.
Now, some previous lives can massively influence what you're in. So it's I don't run around saying, "Oh my God, you had a past life as this or that." I would never do such a thing. It poisons the well. But we've all had past lives. We're all old souls. Some people are seeking to overcome things that happened in other lives and to grow from it. Some people don't have that awareness. They're just trying to get through this life. It's complicated. Human beings are very complicated and very
Yeah.
fascinating.
You know what confuses me hearing this sometimes, because I'm not dwelling on it, but what confuses me is how does karma come into effect or come into this role of trauma? Are we paying back things that we need to pay back, or no? Okay.
Well, it's yes and no.
Okay.
The karmic wheel can take 1,000 years to turn. You have to remember that. Karma doesn't have a clock that says, okay, now we got to give you that lesson.
Hmm.
That can happen, of course. But if something happened 400 years ago and you have had a couple lives in between,
Hmm.
but whatever that karmic lesson was from that life 400 or 500 years ago can all of a sudden appear in your life all these hundreds of years later. And you have to work it out with that person. Maybe you picked an abusive parent because you're giving that parent the opportunity to choose more wisely, to be more loving. But it's a really hard choice. Sometimes you're there karmically for another person, but you're not going to know that.
Hmm.
And sometimes they're there for you. Maybe that person was detrimental, so you could stand up to them. Maybe you could say, I'm not going to be like you. No matter how much this man was physically abused as a child, he never did that. to his own children or his wife, ever. He just, they could just never give him enough love. He had 3 marriages.
Mm-hmm.
But the other facets of his personality, that's why people are complicated. Was he a good or bad man? He was a man who suffered, and he handled it not in a way that was beneficial for him, but the other character traits, generosity, goodness, kindness, honesty, except about that, they were there. So maybe in another life, he will know love. That's why he crossed people over, so they can get so much healing from the things that happened in this life. And that may help to mitigate their karmic path in the future.
That makes sense to me. That's really interesting. And it's fascinating and it's complicated. It's just it's all kinds of feelings all in one.
Well, there's all kinds of feelings. It's kind of like when I wrote this book, I have a whole section on the karma of having psychic ability. What gets you into trouble karmically with this ability, and especially blurting things out. Like, there's some medium in Long Island that runs around blurting stuff out to people. Well, that's really detrimental. You do not want to do that because you keep poisoning the well with each person you talk to. And oh, by the way, what if you're wrong?
Right.
That's why I did case studies, because only with a case study can you begin to understand the karmic ramifications of the actions if you have psychic ability. And can I give you an example?
Please.
There's a story of, I'm a person who does not believe in telling someone's future. That is an extremely detrimental thing to do. Your future, we have an infinite number of futures. Some are more likely to happen than others, but you don't given the entire picture. Only God has that.
Right.
And your actions determine on a day-to-day basis what the final picture is going to look like in each lifetime. So there's a story, and this story comes from Dr. Richard Lawrence, who wrote Unlock Your Psychic Powers. And he tells this story, so I want to make sure I give credit to the author who shared this. There was apparently an amazing psychic in England who read palms. He was a palmist. And this guy comes in and he reads this guy's palm and he says, "Oh my gosh, I can see that you've been trying something over and over and over again. Well, I'm going to tell you, I can see that the very next time you do it, you're going to be successful." And the man says, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much." And he went out and he successfully committed suicide.
Oof.
So every
Yeah.
listener should be saying, "Oh my gosh, why didn't the psychic see his death in his hand?
Mm-hmm.
Why?" And the answer is because no psychic sees 100%. It's designed to keep you humble. You have an ability.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't all knowing.
Mm-hmm.
They saw he was going to be successful, but the psychic didn't get to see at what. That was a big deal.
Yes. I love what you said right now that being psychic is designed to keep you humble.
Yes, one of the biggest mistakes you can make if you have psychic ability is being egotistical about it. I can't tell you how many people beg me to tell them what the future is going to hold. Well, what makes you think I know that? I don't. I might get a feeling, based on your character, but I cannot make a prediction. And a lot of times when people, call 1-800 psychic hotline,
Mm-hmm.
they want someone to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Well, you're giving your power away when you do that, and somebody's just going to make a small fortune every time
Right.
you do it. But when you have this ability and you're really humble about it, and what keeps you humble is studying spiritual law and keeping your toe on that line, not crossing that line.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to spiritual law, you don't tell somebody their past lives. You don't. If you see something, if you're a medical intuitive and you can see illness inside someone's body, you can't just blurt that out. You can't. I went over to someone's house and I immediately started coughing because I could see cancer sometimes for a medical intuitive looks like black smoke in the body. And
Hmm.
sometimes you can see it and sometimes you can't. That's the other thing. It's not 100% of the time. People think that if you're psychic, you're the great and mighty Oz 100% of the time. Newsflash, you're not. Sometimes you get a feeling, sometimes you don't. I couldn't say, gee, I think this looks like early cancer. What if I was wrong? What if it was something else? So I didn't say anything. This person saw their doctor all the time anyway, so it wasn't really up to me to say that.
Hmm.
It's like if you see somebody about to jump off a bridge, yeah, you should probably try and help them.
Sure.
But you have to be very circumspect in how you go about sharing what you see or you know. It is enormously challenging.
That is really challenging. I can also imagine that it would be really challenging if somebody isn't aware, as you were talking about it hasn't studied the spiritual laws, and they're just getting so much information and just literally like kind of just letting it all out, just saying everything that they see, rather than holding back and really knowing the karmic ramifications that can come from that.
And you see that when someone says, I see that you're going to have an accident in your future. Well, maybe not. Maybe one of the other things that's happening right now is that the timeline is changing. And that started happening in the 90s. For people who could see certain things, what they would see today wasn't there the next day or a week later because so much happening that timelines are moving and shifting and they're not stable. So you think you see something, but it may simply go away in a day or so. So you have to be really, really careful when you say something. And there's another facet to that because a person will give a psychic all their power. Tell me something. So psychics got a lot of power when you say that. They can say anything. That doesn't mean it's true. There was a woman who said, oh my gosh, I can see that your father in this life abused you horribly in a past life. He was a terrible man. This woman believed the psychic and this father that she'd had a warm, loving relationship all her life was completely bewildered when she turned against him, and he had no idea why. Was that psychic correct or not? The psychic earned horrible karma. But the woman who asked for the reading earned worse karma because once she gave her power away, she believed what the psychic said and she destroyed a relationship with her father, which affected the entire family. What you do ripples out for a really long time. You have to be careful with what you say.
So then, what about when you were sharing in your book the psychics that were accurate with Lincoln's prediction of being assassinated or JFK being assassinated? So when should somebody listen to a psychic?
That's a really good question. Lincoln had already had premonitions of his death. And I think he was really tired. 5 years of the Civil War and the volume of death that he saw, including the death of his own son, literally, and his super crazy wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, she was not fully stable. He was really tired. And the war was over. He had ended the war and he died, I think, April 14th, 1865. And I could be wrong on that exact date, but it was in April. And he was really, really tired. Sometimes when the soul is tired, things happen. And he did have several people warn him, you need to be careful. What does that mean? Does it mean you
Yeah.
stop living your life? I mean, what does that mean? Gene Dixon was a very famous psychic who warned John F. Kennedy that if he went to Dallas, he would absolutely die because it kept being shown to her over and over. And she wanted to protect him. And it's a very fine line, because did she create a reality, or was that already in existence? Or since this was such a massive historical timeline event like 9/11 or World War II, or you can think of these huge things that have happened, many people will see them in the future. There were a lot of people that saw the Titanic was going to sink. Many, many people saw that. Actually got off the ship and didn't sail because they could see it was going to sink. So something that can exist in time and space in the future. That's what makes this conversation very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Because should Jean Dixon have said anything to John F. Kennedy? She did what she felt was right in the moment. But no president, to be blunt, is going to sit down and listen to a psychic say, don't go to a political meeting. Don't
Mm-hmm.
try to win over Texas because your vice president is a Texan. Lyndon Johnson was, a big Texan. Johnson and Kennedy, and we're probably going to find out about that a whole lot more real soon. Johnson and Kennedy couldn't stand each other, but they had to politically join together to win the election against Nixon. So she was trying to save him, but that future already existed, and there wasn't anything anyone was going to do to stop that.
Mm-hmm.
Those wheels had been in motion for a very long time, which means that the energy was echoing out, which is why she felt it.
That makes sense. So it was already in existence. And if something is already in existence, I mean, if we live in different parallel realities, can't we change the future as well?
Yes, people think time runs in a straight line like a ruler,
Sure.
but time doesn't work that way. Time goes in eddies and streams and loops, which is a very difficult concept, because we know we get up today and we're going to go to bed tonight, and next week we're going to do X. But time exists in multiple dimensions as far as the ramifications. We know that there's no time in the fourth dimension. But if something exists and it's going to happen, and it's part of a future, you're going to be able to see it to a certain degree, but maybe you don't see it completely.
Mm-hmm.
What am I trying to say? I've had several cases where I could see my husband's death. And in those cases, I could go in and say, you need to be very careful, because I can see all of these things are lining up. And I waited and waited. And in Ghost Stories from the Ghost Point of View, Volume 3, that story is there, where I describe these recurring dreams of this accident. And then, night after night, I'm waking up and I can see it and feel it, and it's horrible. And finally, the day comes when this accident is going to take place. Most premonitions are never in that short of a period of time. Some of them are months in advance or even years in advance. That's the eddy in the pool of time. But in this case, I could see that on that Saturday at about 4:30 in the afternoon in New London, Connecticut, he was going to die, and I would be a widow. And I didn't know what was going to lead up to it, but as each day went by, I got more pieces of the puzzle. And when I finally had enough of the picture and the final piece fell into place, I told him, and he didn't leave the house. So did I get to see that so he wouldn't die?
It's a great question.
And I mean, I've had other situations with him. So I had the same situation with the recurring dreams with one of my brothers. And I thought madness would set in. I was like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I don't want to create a reality. And so finally, I asked him, how are you feeling? And he said, I feel like something is trying to kill me, but I can't put my finger on it. It's like, okay, He's feeling something, I'm feeling something.
Mm-hmm.
Put our heads together, we figured out what it was. When we figured out what it was, we resolved it. The dreams stopped. It's like karma said, you need to fix this. He isn't supposed to die right now. That's what happened. So, like all psychics, I've had things that I could see I could fix. I've had other things I could see, not a thing I could do about it. And the third aspect is there were things that I could see was going to happen with this person. 5 psychics saw the same thing with this person. All 5 of us were wrong.
Wow.
What we saw happening with this person never happened on any level. When was the last time 5 psychics agreed who didn't know each other? So that was a future that never manifested for that person, ever. I saw a situation where my daughter and her first husband were going to have this little girl, and I could see her with this dark hair and these green eyes, and I could see, my son-in-law, they got divorced. They never had that child. So I'm trying to say, just because I saw something doesn't mean it's going to happen. So when you have a premonition, you have to be very mindful and maybe write down what you're seeing. Keep a logbook. I talk about this in the Children's Psychic People book a lot. Keep a logbook of your experiences so that you can go back and say, okay, I saw this, but that didn't happen. Or maybe you were afraid for someone and you say a lot of prayers for them. The energy of prayer may have shifted something. You don't know. Maybe the karmic wheel turned and what I saw for this person shifted. I just missed that memo. They didn't tell me.
Mm-hmm.
God bless him. He tried so hard. And he felt like he failed when he died because nothing that anyone ever saw or he saw for himself ever happened. So I want people to understand that you have the ability to see the future in theme and variation. And you have to deal with what's in front of you in the moment. There's no hard and fast rules. The rules of engagement with this are really vague. Take your time, tread carefully. That's why I discuss it in this book at some length. It's really, really hard if you have the ability to see a future. That in the Ghost Stories from a Ghost Point of View, Volume 3, there's a story of Pan Am 103. And I saw that plane explode. And I saw it 11 months before the plane was actually blown up, which meant that the people that I saw, all those ghosts, weren't dead when I saw them. They had 11 months left to live. I thought they were already dead. So when I realized that plane hadn't crashed yet, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't ask what the flight was. I didn't ask where it originated. I didn't ask what day it was. I was in such shock at what I saw. I thought they were already dead. I didn't know how to help them. This was in 1988. I didn't know how to cross the dead over at that point in time. It took me years to learn this. So I'm sharing this so that we all have a journey, and sometimes that journey includes knowing things about the future that with all your heart you wish you didn't know.
Yes. So what can you tell somebody that has such a premonition, such as the one that you had with the Pan Am flight?
Talk about it. Write down what you saw. Write down what you felt. I felt the grief of 270 passengers. I didn't know that the dead grieved.
You felt the future grief.
I felt their future grief, but where their death was already, I guess, preordained.
Predestined.
It was predestined. And there were children on that plane. And I mean, the crush injuries when a plane goes down, no one thinks about that because it would make you crazy if you did. So I didn't know how to cross them over, and I can't cross over someone who hasn't died yet, but I didn't know that.
Mhm.
There are things you can do to mitigate when they die, how you can help them. When the plane did blow up, then I could say prayers that would help them, which I did. I just was in shock that that plane was a. It took 11 months for that event to happen. I felt horrible. I couldn't stop it
Why do you feel that you were given that image? Why were you given that?
because I was in resonance with protection. I worked for the submarine force. I was a terrorist expert. I designed equipment that protected submarines from terrorist attack. I knew who those terrorists were. I knew where country they were from. I had all these puzzle pieces of information. And when the plane did blow up, I remember I got home and my mother was the nanny for our children because I was always traveling. And she said, this plane blew up over Lockerbie, Scotland. And I said, that was my January premonition. And there was a bomb on board the plane from this particular terrorist. And that's what happened. And she said, I don't want to know how you know that. Well, I was in resonance with that whole scenario.
Mhm.
When TWA 800 blew up, I didn't feel a thing. When, Malaysian flight MH370 disappeared, I didn't feel a thing. I had no knowledge. Thank gosh. If you had to feel or have a premonition for every plane crash,
Oh goodness. Yeah.
oh, it would be horrific. One in a lifetime was more than enough.
So when you say that you were in resonance with it, what you mean is you were in that energetic frequency of
Yes,
the
I was in
okay.
the energetic frequency of my job was to protect. I had a three-star admiral that, I mean, he was a senior Jewish admiral in the Navy. Everybody adored this guy. He was a wonderful man. And I'm thinking, how am I supposed to protect this admiral? He's flying all the time.
Hmm.
And I came up with all of these processes. I worked with the admiral's aide and taught him how to protect this much beloved flag officer and the flag officers who followed him because I worked for several of them. And once I began to put learn how to do all that, I'm reading the terrorist alert summaries that were coming in every day, 5 pages single space of horrific acts taking place all over the world. I was in resonance with that information. That's why.
That makes perfect sense. That makes really perfect sense. So what can you tell people who are just, let's say they're listening to this for the first time and for the first time they're realizing that they have some psychic ability and don't know what to do with it? Because I've heard, so for example, my mother, she has abilities where she has dreams and premonitions in her dreams and they happen, but she tells me she hates it. She says, I don't like this gift. I don't like knowing these things. And I've heard that from other people where they don't like it. I feel that not liking it is not there's something about hearing that makes me feel that that if it's a gift, then maybe people need to open up and figure out how they can use it as we spoke earlier, humbly, and what they need to do about it. Or are people able to say, I don't want this, take it away?
Well, everybody's a little different and their karmic path is going to be unique. So
Sure.
you have an ability for some reason and wishing and hoping it's going to go away. I mean, I could wish and hope that I'd be 5'6" all day long, but I'm also 5'1". It's who I am. So I have to accept that. However, what you can do is if you are having these premonitions, then you can say a prayer for the people in the premonitions. So you're not helpless. You can say, I hereby, if you see a plane crash,
Yeah.
say a prayer that these people will move into the light of God at death, or that
Mhm.
something will happen that this plane won't crash. You can say a prayer from your heart. And maybe that's the reason you had the premonition in the first place. And the Pan 103 premonition was not a dream. The premonitions with my husband and my brother, those were dreams. A lot of times Dream premonitions are more personal and they're much closer to home. And you can pay attention to them. Maybe you can mitigate them, maybe you can't. Deciding you hate psychic ability isn't going to help you. Learn to do something with it. And if the gentlest way to handle it is through prayer, that's going to make a difference. I think I have to look for it, but I think I have a prayer for premonitions. I'm almost positive I have one for premonitions because um it's I'll have to look for it, but when you have something that you can do something about, like, I could say to my husband, okay, you really are sick. You really shouldn't go driving today. And so he stays home. Well, he really was ill. Maybe I helped him and maybe that accident didn't happen. So I changed that future and I was grateful for that piece of information.
Could that also have been, though, karmic karmically set up because perhaps he saved your life in a past life?
It could be. It absolutely could be. All of those things are possibilities, yes. And I wouldn't necessarily know or remember it. It's just something that could have happened.
Hmm. Well, this is excellent. I absolutely love talking about this, and I can feel like I can continue here. There's a lot more questions, and I'm really looking forward to having you back again. But I have a poem that I wrote that I'd like to share here with us.
Okay.
Okay, great. A poem that I wrote. And in the midst of karma and dharma, I feel the pull to do what's right. I feel the urge to share my light, to coincide with unseen divine energies, to be in synchronicity of this synergy, to dance with life, to open my heart, and to keep the flow of heavenly wisdom between karma and dharma, between you and me, within you and we.
Oh,
And
that
that,
is beautiful. I love
thank
that.
you. I appreciate that.
That is very cleverly written and very true. Very
Thank you. I
true. That's
appreciate it. Well,
lovely.
thanks to your energy. I wrote it like maybe 5 minutes before we started recording. So thank you so
Oh my
much.
gosh. Oh,
So where can, I'm sorry?
nice job.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Where can our viewers, our watchers, our listeners get a hold of you and your new book?
The all the books are on ghosthelpers.com and they're available on Amazon. Just, if you click the link on the websites or tinaerwin.com, they connect you directly to Amazon, and it is also an Audible book. Almost all of them. I'm doing the last Audible book now, but the Psychic Children book and the prayer book are Audible books, so that if you don't want to say the prayer yourself, you just have me say it by pushing a button. It's kind of cool. And yeah, the websites describe a little bit more, but the books are really designed to be of as much spiritual service to people as humanly possible.
Absolutely love it. And it's actually felt very much so. I can feel the humble presence of your energy within every word and every line. And I'm just so grateful that I have this connection with you. Thank you so much for connecting with me
Thank you
again.
so
I'm
much
just
for
so
having
humbled
me. This
by
was
this
so much fun.
connection. What's that?
This was so much fun. Thank you so much.
It's always so much fun. I'm just so honored to be able to hold this space for you. Thank you so much, Tina. Looking forward to keeping in touch with you.
All right, sounds like a plan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.